Hello, 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 hello. Welcome, everyone. This is another wonderful Sunday morning here in Fort Worth, Texas. I am Patrick Stewart, the founder and chief editor of the Taoist Online, and we will continue our journey with 365 Tao by Ting Tao, a daily meditation guide. As some of you may know, every week we go through a couple of more chapters. There are 365 chapters. Now you're supposed to do one a day, and that's how it's designed. But of course, you go a little slower here so that we can talk about each one. So, hope you guys had a great morning and a great week. It's good to see you guys. So let's just pick up with chapter 14. This is the Kindle version of the book on the left side of my screen. It's called Positioning. So here, as always, it starts off with a poem, and then we get into the actual lesson, and then I'll give you my thoughts about it. All right. Heron stands in the blue estuary, solitary, white, unmoving for hours. A fish, quick avian darting, the prey captured. People always ask how to follow Tao. It is as easy and as natural as the heron standing on the water. The bird moves when it must. It does not move when stillness is appropriate. The secret of its serenity is a type of vigilance, a contemplative state. The heron is not in mere dumbness or sleep. It knows a lucid stillness. It stands unmoving in the flow of the water. It gazes unperturbed and is aware. When Tao brings it something that it needs, it seizes the opportunity without hesitation or deliberation. Then it goes back to its essence without disturbing itself or its surroundings. Unless it found the right position and the waters flow and remained patient, it would not have succeeded. For essence? Yeah, I think that's how you say it. Actions in life can be reduced to two factors: positioning and timing. If we are not in the right place at the right time, we cannot possibly take advantage of what life has to offer us. Almost anything is appropriate, but if an action is in accord with the time and the place, but we must be vigilant and prepared. Even if the time and the place are right, we can still miss our chance if we do not notice the moment, if we act inadequately, or if we hamper ourselves with doubts and second thoughts. When life presents an opportunity, we must be ready to seize it without hesitation or inhibition. Position is useless without awareness. If we have both, we make no mistakes. Hello, Inya in chat. All right, let's talk about positioning. So, in this book, as I assume, we'll learn a lot about spontaneity, right? And being open to spontaneity. It doesn't mean that we don't plan anything. It doesn't mean that we just sit there and do nothing either. The example the chapter used was the heron, which is a bird which stands in the water to fish, like a shallow stream. Stands there very patiently, and then it sees the fish. As the fish just naturally tends to swim by, grabs it. It doesn't circle around in the air. It doesn't walk along in the water frantically. It just very calmly and very intently stands there and waits for something to come by and grabs it. So too are we to live our lives with opportunities. We put ourselves in the correct position And then we allow ourselves to be spontaneous so that when an occasion does arise, we are already there to capitalize on the opportunity. So if for a human example, let's take our jobs. Now, a lot of times, jobs don't just happen. You have to apply, go through interviews, and then you have this job. As you're working, and this is usually the harder part, typically you want to be promoted, right? You don't want to stay in this same position forever. So you, as you're working, as you're sitting there or standing there, you have to keep yourself open to an occasion to move on, to move up, to do something that's great, to capitalize on something. For example, I used to work at an Apple retail store back from 2008 to 2013. And even though it was a very hectic job and we were always running around selling something, I needed to keep myself nimble and open to the possibility of moving up out of the salesperson specialist role and up into the genius role. So whenever a position became available or someone needed help with something, you're always there. I was always there to learn something new, to help carry out something and listen to those conversations. How do you talk to customers? How do you deal with an angry customer? Right? Always keep your ear open. Always kept my eyes open. And eventually, I was given the opportunity to test and move up in the company, and I did. Now, if I had just stayed there with blinders on and just done my specialist job forever, if I'm just quiet and I just don't do anything, then you miss the opportunity, right? Opportunities are always there, right? They always appear because life is too random sometimes for them not to. But even if you're in the right place, if you're not in that right mindset, they're going to pass you by and you're not even going to notice. And then you'll wonder why you're still doing this thing or you're still sitting in this place. And it's because maybe the opportunity missed you, or maybe you missed the opportunity, right? Because you weren't paying attention. You got to pay attention. You got to be open to spontaneity. All right. We'll move on. Chapter 15, time. And yes, in the chat, spontaneity is related to self-confidence as well. That is very true. Be confident in yourself that you are going to see and grab the opportunity when it's there. If you continue to think that you're a failure and that nothing you do matters, then even if you see the opportunity, you're not going to have that self-confidence to go out there. And as a boss, as someone who manages a team, if my team members are not self-confident, I can see that. Like, that is absolutely something I take note of during review time or during one-on-one times. And hello, Taoist Fox, in the chat. All right, chapter 15. The river surging course, uninterrupted current, headwater, channel, mouth. Can they be divided? Each day, we all face a peculiar problem. We must validate our past, face our present, plan for the future. Those who believe that life was better in the old days sometimes are blind to the reality of the present. Those who live only for the present frequently have little regard for either precedent or consequence. And those who live only for some deferred reward often strain themselves with too much denial. Thinking of past present, and future is a useful conceptual technique, but ultimately, they must be appropriately balanced and joined. We must understand how the past affects us. We should keep the present full of rich and satisfying experiences, and we should devote some energy each day to building for the future. Just as a river can be said to have parts that cannot be clearly divided, so too should we consider the whole of our time when deciding how to spend our lives. So this gets back a little bit to what we were just talking about, right? About how to live your life. And I mentioned earlier that, being spontaneous and being available for that moment of spontaneity does not mean that you just don't plan or that you don't think about things that have happened or things that may happen, right? I had a friend who I worked with at Apple, and then I brought him over into another job with me. But we worked together for about 7 years, almost 8 years. And his parents taught him this phrase that you're free to say what you want, but you're not free from the consequences of what you say. And you always hear, oh, I have freedom of speech. I can say anything I want to. And yeah, that's true. But man, if you tick off the wrong person, like, there are consequences to that speech, right? So that's what this is getting at. Thinking of past, present, and future is a useful conceptual technique, but it must be balanced and joined with living in that moment, right? Living for and living with your natural flow, right? With Tao. Let's see if I can come up with a good example. Oh, sports. That's always a good example. Let's take everyone's favorite basketball player, maybe Michael Jordan. If we were to ask Michael Jordan, hey, did you ever practice? I'm pretty sure he would say yes. If we asked, hey, did you ever think about that game you lost? Of course he does. Of course he thinks about it. He learns from it. He learns from his mistakes, from his team's mistakes. Maybe we can do this better next time. If we asked him, are you thinking about the game you have coming up tomorrow? Of course he is. He's thinking about who is he going to be competing against? What strategy are they making to play against his team? But when he's in the game, when he's on the court, I bet he's not standing there and thinking, what happened 4 days ago? No, he's just doing. It's flowing out naturally through his abilities to play basketball. We've mentioned it in previous streams, but the concept of wu wei, of effortless action, right? Being able to perform highly skilled functions without that manual concentration. It's just instinctive. It just happens. That's really what I think this chapter is getting to. In chat, it says, words are a powerful force for good and evil, and it is up to us to choose how we will use them. Absolutely. Absolutely. Our words are powerful on purpose. I mean, why have words if they're not going to cause people to do things? That's the whole point of communication. But at the same time, we must remember that this is not inherently a book. This is a thing. There are many words for this thing. If I were in French, it would be called something else. If I were in France, if I knew Spanish, it would be another name. There are 100 names to describe this thing, right? So yes, words are powerful. But at the same time, words are meaningless. They are as powerful as we allow them to be. And that's something I've been teaching my kids recently, is that, yes, your words matter. But at the same time, try to not let words that are thrown at you to be as powerful, right? Is that contradictory? Absolutely, right? The world is contradictory. Taoism is one of the most is contradictory. It's supposed to be, right? Yeah, it's balance. Yeah, thank you, Inya. It's balance. You have to find that right place. It's hard. I mean, I'm not saying I'm there or that I'll ever get there. We just have to try our best. But I think we can get there. I think we can. I think one day I'll find that balance, and yeah, maybe we all will. All right, chapter 16. Ordinary. Umbrella, light, landscape, sky. There is no language of the holy. The sacred lies in the ordinary. No one is able to describe the spiritual except by comparing it to the ordinary things. One scripture describes the divine word as, quote, an umbrella of protection. Another says a God is light. Heaven is supposed to be in the sky. And even ascetics who have rejected sex use erotic images to describe enlightenment. People have to resort to metaphor to state the divine. Even esoteric languages have been invented, and they mystify the outsider. Holy words always appear that way to the uninitiated. After one learns to read them, their message becomes assimilated. We no longer worry about the images, for we have found the truth that the words were indicating. When you buy something that has assembly instructions, you follow the instructions, but you do not then venerate the instructions. Spiritual attainment is no different. Once you've gained it, instructions become secondary. Spirituality gained is no different than the ball game you play, the work you do, the car you drive, and the love you make. If you constantly regard Tao as extraordinary, then it remains unknown and outside yourself, a myth, a fantasy, an unnameable quantity. But once you know it, it is yours and part of your daily life. All right, this is something really cool. And I love this about Taoism, by the way. In Christianity, you are taught, I was taught, that the Bible was God's holy word. And I always felt bad for, marking, like highlighting in your Bible. Did you ever feel that? You don't want to throw away any of your Bibles? Even if they're like falling apart, and you're like, you felt bad because there was that divine idea that the words contained in these pieces of paper were God's word. In Taoism, let me find my book here. All right, so this is a copy of the Tao Te Ching. This is the Guy Fu Feng and Jane English translation. My favorite translation, by the way. Is this text important? Absolutely. Is there wisdom to be gained by studying this? Yes, of course. Absolutely. Is this magical? No. Did a supernatural being come through Lao Tzu and carve this onto stone, and then he copied it? Nope. 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 It's just a book. It's just a book, right? And once I have, assuming I ever get to this point, once I have obtained and learned what there is to be learned, this is trash. Right? I love the example it used in the chapter. Instructions, an instruction manual. Recently, I put together a loft bed for my 9-year-old. It was from IKEA. It came with 8 instruction manuals. Thankfully, we bought it from someone, so we only had to use one of the 8 instruction manuals. There are no words anywhere in it. It's just pictures. It's crazy. It's crazy. If you ever put together anything from IKEA, it's like the worst thing you've ever done. But once it's put together, the instructions are no longer needed. Your following of Tao and of your spirituality is, as hard as this may be to understand sometimes, the same, right? When you internalize this, when you have learned it, when you begin to practice it, this becomes secondary to your life. You're not supposed to study this ad nauseum forever and think that this is some sort of mystical book that you can never possibly understand, right? Like in Christianity at church, I was always told, well, we can't possibly understand God's will. I'm like, well, what's the point of the Bible then? Like, if I can't understand anything, why are we still reading this? It sounds awful. I'm sorry. It's not meant to be sacrilegious. But here, I think the most Taoist thing you can do is read this book over and over again, as much as you possibly can, and then forget all about it. And then, a year later, pick it up, read it again, and learn it all over again, as it was brand new, right? Because you've internalized that. You live it. You become it. It becomes with you. And when time goes by and you read this again, you are reading it from a new place spiritually. And you will learn new things spiritually about your life, because your life is different. You're different. So when you read this book, it will be read differently. That's what this means. That's what this chapter means, right? The ordinary is only ordinary when you compare it to the extraordinary, right? Once you've gained it, instructions become secondary. Love it. That's awesome. That's super cool. That was one of the biggest things I had to learn coming out of, going to church all the time, was that my first instinct was, oh man, this is a holy text. And people were like, no, it's not holy text. Yeah, because it was hard to wrap my mind around. All right. Chapter 17, cooperation. Cooperation with others, perception, experience, tenacity. Know when to lead and when to follow. When we become involved with a fellowship, we must gradually become an integral, organic part of that organization. The relationship will be one of mutual influence. We must carefully influence the collective, and in turn, we will be shaped by the company we keep. Influencing others requires perception. We need to know when to act, when to be passive, when others are receptive to us, and when they will not listen. This takes experience, of course, and it is necessary to take part in a great many relationships, from our families to community associations, to cultivate the proper sensitivity. Man, I have so much to say about this. In time, there will be moments of both frustration and success, but in either case, a certain tenacity is crucial. If we are thwarted in our initiatives, then we must persevere by either maintaining our position or changing it if a better one prevails. Ah, yes, spontaneity, open to the moment. If we are successful, we must not rely on charisma alone, but we must also work to fully realize what the group has resolved to do. True leadership, here's the key. True leadership is a combination of initiative and humility. The best leader remains obscure, leading but drawing no personal attention. As long as the collective has direction, the leader is satisfied. Credit is not taken, and it will be awarded when the people realize that it was the subtle influence of the leader that brought them success. This is one of my favorites. All right. Did anyone ever watch Futurama back in the day? I know it's come and gone a couple of times, and I think it's even coming back again. But there was an episode of Futurama a long time ago where Bender, one of the characters, is this robot. It's a sci-fi show, by the way. It's comedy. He gets blasted out into space, right? Just randomly floats along, and the civilization grows on his back, and he becomes like their god. And no matter what he does, it all falls apart, right? They end up nuking each other, and everybody dies. Well, he keeps floating. He's all sad, and he basically runs into what is played off like this galaxy that beeps and boops at him, and it's essentially the god, right? It's interpreted as the actual god. So one of God's advice to Bender is straight out of the Tao Te Ching. I mean, I don't know if they meant it that way, or if it's just, words of wisdom that have been passed down for thousands of years, but it's certainly influenced by it. And God says, if you do it right, the people will think you've done nothing at all, right? Which is exactly what we just heard. If you're leading correctly, the people will think you're not leading at all. It is a subtle influence that you, let's say, nudge your followers or your group into the correction they need to go. Now, this is very difficult in real life, right? Sounds very mystical, very amazing. But from someone who has a family of 5, leads a team of 6 at his job, runs a publication of 6 or 8. What are we up to now? I can't even keep count. There's so many of us. And in the publication, there are hundreds of writers now, volunteer writers. It is very easy to put yourself on that pedestal and say, this is my publication. This is my team. This is what we're going to do. You need to do this. But what you'll find with that type of leadership is, 1, eventually there will be disagreements with the direction you're pushing. Those who are unhappy will either quit, burn out, or even worse, they'll try to usurp you. In a job, they may go around you, right? They may go over your head to your boss and, complain. And that's the last thing you want at a job is for someone to go over your head. If we're dealing with family, your kids just will say one thing and then do the other when you're not looking, right? It is impossibly difficult to always be the subtle influencer, but that's the goal, right? It's certainly the goal in the Tao Te Ching. For those, if you haven't read it, this is mostly a book on how to lead a government, specifically. The first half, at least the first half of most copies of the Tao Te Ching, sound very poetic and are usually interpreted for the individual. But as you get further along in the chapters, especially as you get to chapters in the 50s and 60s, it's very clear that this is meant for political leadership. And you'll find all kinds of messages in there. And yeah, of course, we're all leaders in our own way. But it's no surprise. It shouldn't come as a surprise that in that era of China's history, leadership was a big deal. There were multiple kingdoms and they were fighting with each other all the time, and there was war and just endless kingdoms fighting over each other. So a type of political ideology arose. That's it, guys. This is political ideology. Back then, I'm sure they called it propaganda. But this style of leadership is essential to the Tao Te Ching's teachings. So yeah, if you're doing it right, they will have no idea that you've done anything at all. And it's only afterwards, when they look back and try to connect those dots, that they will say, he is a good leader. Look at how he motivated us, how he pushed us, how he nudged us into the correct position that worked out. Like a coach of a football team. A coach cannot play the game for his team. He cannot just sit there and beat his players over the head, right, with sticks all day long. He can't physically go and put them into position more than maybe once. He has to convince them somehow that these are the appropriate ways to play, and then they must go and play. And during a game time, it'll feel like they've done all the work. But when they look back, they will realize, what an amazing coach who trained us, who motivated us into being such good players. All right. What are we on? 18. All right, spectrum. Pure light is all colors. Therefore, it has no hue. Only when singleness is scattered does color appear. When we see pure sunlight streaming down upon us, it is a pure radiance so bright that we can discern neither details nor hues from its source. But when light strikes the gossamer wings of a dragonfly, or when it shines through misty rain, or even when it shines on the surface of our skin, it is polarized into millions of tiny rainbows. the world explodes with color because all the myriad surfaces and textures fracture the light into innumerable overlapping dimensions. The same is true of Tao. In its pure state, it embodies everything. Thus, it shows nothing. Just as pure light has all colors, yet shows no color, so too is all existence initially latent and without differentiation in Tao. Only when Tao enters our world does it explode into myriad things. We say that everything owes its existence to Tao, but really, these things are only refractions of the great Tao. Colored light, when mixed together, becomes pure, bright light again. That is why those who follow Tao constantly speak of returning. They unify all areas of their lives and unify all distinctions into a whole. There cannot be diversity within unity. When our consciousness rejoins the true Tao, there is only brightness, and all color disappears. This would be one of the ones that I would meditate on for a while. Let's see. As a follower of science, since I was a little kid, I loved watching those PBS. So in America, we have this public broadcasting system. It's the channel PBS. And I do a lot of educational shows, specials. So when I was a kid, they would do a big one was called Nova. And Nova was very science heavy. They talk about physics and the universe and light and time and all those great conceptual things. So in this chapter, it talks about light, and it reminds me of kind of that wonder I got as a child, learning that when you take something as simple as sunlight and you shine it through a prism and it breaks apart and you see all the different colors of the rainbow, or when you look up in the sky and after it rains and it's kind of misty and you see the rainbow in the sky, or even like a water hose, right? You're out there watering the yard, you're washing your car, and you can just sit there and see it. It's always amazing on how complex, hiddenly complex, something so simple can be. With the Tao, or Tao, you hear a lot that everything is Tao. And that's true. But then you run into these kind of logical complexities where you would ask, well, if being still is Tao and acting out is Tao, like, how can that be? Like, how can at the same time Tao do nothing? Or how can Tao do everything? I mean, it's in certain chapters of the Tao Te Ching. It's like the Tao leaves nothing undone, but everything is done. It's something close to that. I forget which chapter that is. So how can both of those be true? How can Tao do nothing but everything at the same time? Right? And the example this book gives is light. Just because the rainbow is multicolored and sunlight appears singularly colored, it's all light. It's all one thing. It's reflections. It's just when that light interacts with different materials that we see the manifestations of light itself. Mm, indeed. Yeah, no, I don't have anything else. I just, I would say that's probably something I'm going to think about all day long. I'm really going to think about that one today. Mm, we are everything all at the same time, but yet we are individuals. You know, before we move on, reminds me of it was last week, the week before, when I talked about us all being connected. And when we sit here in our rooms or we're going to school or we're doing our jobs, it's very easy to feel that we are very alone. It is more difficult to remember that we are all connected. Much like the rainbow is light split, so too are we, the Tao, divided. It's just the way the Tao has manifested that creates this illusion of separation. I think it's important to remember that this separation ends. Maybe sooner than we want to sometimes. Maybe all the time. Maybe sooner than we want to all the time. But we are returning to the source. And I think that's spoken to a lot in Taoism, this returning to your true nature, returning to the Tao, as much in a spiritual sense as it is in the physical sense. Our bodies will return to ash and dust, and our energies will disperse, and we will be as we started. Now, what happens after that? I mean, what happens when you burn a log? What happens when a tree dies? What happens when a loved one passes away? I think it's very clear what happens. I mean, I've watched it. We've all watched it. So our separation, our physical separation currently may seem concrete. I am not this coffee mug. I am me, and this is a coffee mug. But one day, that division will be gone, and we'll just be. In the chat, it says, happiness is also like sunlight. If we see it with open eyes, it would be unbearable. But if we see it via a prism in the subcomponents of a rainbow, then we can enjoy the sun too. Indeed. Indeed. Sometimes taking everything in at once is maddening, right? I think that's why we have the mind blown emoji. It's like a little face and his like head's exploding. Oh, yeah. I mean, if I go outside right now and look at the sun, I'll go blind. But if I look at its manifestations, if I look at it broken apart, then I can accept each part and comprehend the sun through its many pieces. And yeah, happiness is a range of emotions, right? You can be giddy, you can be happy, you can be joyful, you can be prideful in a good way, in a bad way. There's all different forms of being happy. I mean, I can look at, children and their version of being happy and an adult's version of being happy do not look the same. As a parent, I can promise that is not the same, right? They do not manifest in the same way. The words are different, the actions are different, but it all comes from the same place, right? It is all happiness. So even though we can define it differently, and even though it appears to be different, it is all Tao. All right, one more. Kindle, stop Kindle. Nope. There we go. Initiative. Let us not be confused with kaleidoscopic reality. Using wisdom and courage to act. Let us not add to the confusion. The world is a storm of myriad realities, yet we cannot allow ourselves to be swept into the vortex. To do so is to be lost, and to lose the true center where all understanding will come. We must act, but in the right way. Action must be guided by both intellect and experience. We learn from teachers, elders, and others, but we must also test what we learn in the world. It is not enough to simply meditate, and it is not enough to have theoretical knowledge. We need both in order to be wise. Only when wisdom, courage, timing, and perseverance are combined can one have a sound basis for initiative. The action must be complete. It must burn clean. It cannot leave any bad ramifications or lingering traces. An act that leaves destruction, resentment, or untidiness in its wake is a poor one. Then initiative is insufficient and Tao has not been attained. All right, this is an interesting one. It's short. I love that word myriad. That shows up often. In fact, we just spoke about it, right? In most translations of the Tao Te Ching, it's there. Like it is a word. Sometimes you'll hear it translated as 10,000, right? That was a big number in ancient Chinese. It was like saying a million bajillion things. So the world is complicated. We cannot allow ourselves to be swept up in this craziness that we experience all the time, right? We must not lose our focus as this storm rages around us. The chapter goes on to speak about actions and what it means to be truly wise, right? True wisdom is a combination of multiple things. Just as light is a combination of multiple colors, so too is wisdom a combination of multiple thoughts and actions. So this last chapter here, this last paragraph, says only when wisdom, courage, timing, and perseverance are combined can one have a sound basis for initiative, right? The action must be complete. We can't just begin things and then not finish them, right? That's not good. It's not a good action. It's not action. That's just you kind of kicked over a bucket of water and then walked off. You didn't water any plants You just kind of threw water on it, and then they'll figure it out, right? Those plants, they'll get their water. I mean, I put water on them, right? Does that not count? No, it doesn't count. If you've ever tried to raise plants, you can't do it that way. That's not how a garden works. You must see your action all the way through, from beginning to end, right? It cannot leave any bad ramifications or lingering traces. Remember earlier when we were talking about what a good leader was, right? A good leader doesn't just sit there and do nothing, but it doesn't control every aspect of the organization, right? It influences, but it does see those to completion, right? It nurtures, it guides, to go back to the plants, it waters when it needs to. How much water, what time of day, how much sunlight does it give? All these things are real actions and thoughts that you have to work through if you want the plant to grow healthy, right? It doesn't get into it a lot here, but you'll learn in Taoism that knowledge for knowledge's sake is not a welcome thing. Studying 1,000 books for no purpose is not a good usage of your life or your time, right? The knowledge you gain should be useful. It should make you wiser in the tasks that you perform, in the places that you live, in the people that you associate with. Learning for learning's sake is like taking a box and like shoving it full of packing peanuts until it just can't hold anymore, and the packing peanuts just like start to explode out everywhere. And you ever do that? You ever like open a package, like someone mails you something really big and you open it up, those packing peanuts just go everywhere? Like that's what your brain is like, right? It only holds so much, like only so much is useful. After that, yeah, you can cram more in there, but why? Like it's not helping you at all. And I draw that correlation here into this chapter, right? Like they must burn clean, right? Like you can't just start a fire in the woods and it's all like, I don't know if you guys have ever gone camping and you try and make a fire out there, but it's hard, right? You need to burn certain things at certain times to make it that white smoke, right? And it leaves no traces, right? It's burned all the way through. You got all the energy out of it that it could possibly give you. And that fire was nice, healthy, and now it is gone. So too should our wisdom be and our leadership be. In the chat, it says, if we understand the black hole principle by Stephen Hawking, then we know what happens after we end and how our energy would be released. Oh yeah, going back to the previous chapter. Yeah, exactly. All right. Well, we will leave it. Happiness. We were just talking about happiness. But we'll leave it. We'll come back to this next week with chapter 20. So the book we are working through, just in case you missed it at the beginning, is 365 Tao Daily Meditation by Ding Ming Dao. You can obviously pick it up in the Kindle store on Amazon. I found this at our local half-price bookstore. That's where I buy all my books. Try to buy local. Help out your community, guys. Yeah, I appreciate it. We'll be here every Sunday. You can take a look at what the organization is doing, theDaoistonline.org. You can find a link to our Discord community. You can find different ways to give back to us. If you do want to make a donation, there's a Ko-Fi link in the bottom of this screen. You're welcome to use that if you feel motivated to. We publish articles every day on spirituality, Taoism, any religion. So yeah, check us out, thedaoistonline.org. I really appreciate you guys, and I will see you guys next week. Bye.